I'll tell you a little bit about generations over dinner. I'm going to keep it brief. And then we'll get into our generations over lunch. So as Ken mentioned, this project, Death Over Dinner, launched 10 years ago to get people to have end-of-life conversations, have conversations about grief, conversations about terminal and life-limiting diagnosis, and just in general to get prepared and face it for spiritual reasons, psychological reasons, and many other reasons. And it did become a global phenomenon, continues to this day. And there's actually been over 1 million people who've gathered at events. And it continued, we stopped counting. And it's become this societal ritual that people enact every night of the week all over the world. And so I got very inspired by the work of Stanford Longevity and the work of Chip Conley and the Modern Elder Academy, and also the work of Cogenerate. Said, what would be a way to take some of this incredible work and research and even experiences that were happening on the Modern Elder Academy campus? How do we make something available to everyone that is really about the pillars of these organizations, about intergenerationality, about what it means to be an elder, how we reconsider our second half of our life? How do we get people to have a free experience globally, not just have to come to these gatherings, et cetera? And so we came up with the idea for Generations Over Dinner and said, here it is, here's the model. Let's create, instead of talking about ageism, we are going to talk a little bit about ageism today, but instead of just talking about ageism in our society, why don't we enact the type of world we want to see? Let's actually create an age-diverse gathering. Let's share wisdom across the generations, and let's inspire other people to do it as opposed to just talking about the problem. And so Generations Over Dinner launched about 2 months ago in beta. And there have been hundreds of dinners all over the country and all over the world. And I'm going to talk to you in a little bit about a project that we are launching with AmeriCorps, which will be on the Martin Luther King Day, January 16th. So there's a very beautiful film where you get to see generations talking to each other over a beautiful dinner with wonderful footage. And that just ended, and we can clap for it. But today I'm joined with some friends from we're 3 generations, but more or less. We have 50-year age span, more or less, today at the table. Lois Epel, who is
86.
Is 86.
Tomorrow.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, 85.
85. A psychotherapist and many things we're going to get into. Donna Griffin is the founder and CEO of Eldera, and my dear friend Elissa Epel, who is vice chair of the Department of Psychiatry at UCSF, renowned researcher, author, has a book out in a couple weeks. We're going to hear about it. So as way of introductions, and those were really brief, so you can expand upon them, but we'll start with you, Lois. What generation are you? We probably already know. But what is one common misconception about your generation?
Oh, maybe that we're not interesting. When in fact, and also that we're old and sick and just not very interesting anymore, when actually, personally, well, I feel so lucky. I am so full of gratitude. These years have really been the best. The whole 70 decade, and now I'm into 86. I don't know what will happen tomorrow, but I am really grateful for being able to live so fully in the day. And you know, my whole thing is life is short, lick the spoon.
Brilliant.
I'm just going to move her mic because it's a little
sure.
not too loud for people who have hearing issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. And who are this generation?
Donna.
Okay, I'm Dana Griffin. I'm Generation Y, also known as Millennial. I identify as an elder millennial, let's be clear here. But I think that the biggest misconception about my generation is that we're all the same. Everybody wants to talk to millennials. We are not the same. as I'm sure you would all feel about each of your generations. So I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation about how do we tap into our own individuality and bring what's best about our own lives into the world.
Beautiful. Elissa?
Gen X. I'm an older Gen X. They're known for being latchkey children, which I was for a few years. Well, my mother was in graduate school. And being really self-reliant and independent and not so interested in social issues. We, Gen X, depending on when you are, if you're on the older end like me, we were typing. When I applied to college, I ended up seeing and using my first Mac here in the Student Computer Center, which probably doesn't exist because everyone has their own now, but it was miraculous. And I'll stop there.
No worries. And we can let these conversations roll, so don't feel like.
Well, I was so shocked to hear her say that she was a latchkey kid, my daughter.
I knew you wouldn't like
I
that.
did go to graduate school while she was young. And,
I related when I read that generation. It was starting to be two working parents, and I thought, yeah, I did have a key.
you did have a key.
Wow, this is how two therapists work things across the family. Very good, very good. I'm impressed. Since we already heard from Gen X, I'm Gen X as well, but I'll bring my daughters into the room. They're Gen Z. One is 14 and one is 22, and their names are August and Violet. And one misconception I think we have about Gen Z is that they are not interested in talking about death or grief or end of life. Because they can't imagine it. The youth think they're never going to die, etc. And not just because they're my daughters. I've been in conversations with lots of Gen Z folks. There is now a real interest in talking about grief. There's a real awareness that life is limited and short, and unexpected things can happen. And I think in great part that has to do with the pandemic. And so there is a whole generation that is more primed for these conversations about the human condition than I think we've seen in a while. So August and Violet, you are now included. Next question that I have for you. Both of you at a pretty young age decided to work in aging. And for you, Elissa, that was before aging was really in many ways a field. But I'm curious about that decision for both of you, Dana and Elissa.
It actually started here. I had a preview that we were getting it all wrong about aging. So I was in a classroom with Laura Carstensen, who many of you know, and she was showing us the myths of aging, and it was mind-blowing. I had every stereotype solidified in my mind, and I couldn't believe the data on how we've gotten it wrong with our negative stereotypes. And the other part of her work is the beauty with aging, the shaping of our world to be more positive relationships, selecting into environments, controlling what we can control, and not trying to control things that are out of our control, not sweating the small stuff. We know that so well about aging, the wisdom that comes with aging. And there's all sorts of research like Dana. So let's fast forward 30 years. We now know those stereotypes are toxic to how we treat others and how we actually embody our own aging. So for example, my colleague Becca Levy at Yale has shown that the more we believe those negative stereotypes, the more we internalize them, the more we live them, the more a hip fracture might turn into, debilitating long-term care, or we're more likely to get Alzheimer's despite whether we have the risky gene or not. We're more likely to do preventive behaviors and recover more quickly when we have a picture of positive aging and we actually have a role model. So that was one piece. I went into understanding health and healthy aging. And I guess I'll just stop there. So that was my eyes opening about aging is actually really interesting. We construct it. It's elastic. It's not just the chronological years. And that got me very interested in studying predictors of healthy longevity.
Beautiful.
I came at it a little bit differently. So I was raised by my grandparents in Transylvania in Romania, and I surrounded myself with older adults my entire life. About a third of my friend group are between 60s and 90s, and that's just where I feel very comfortable. And I didn't come straight to aging. I took a detour through advertising and data. And it wasn't until one of my closest elder mentors and mother figures ended up passing away that I had this realization that I wanted to do something different and really focus on aging. And it's funny when I tell people that I'm in aging, they look at me and they say, "You mean anti-aging?" And I'm like, "No, I mean pro-aging." I believe that older adults are brilliant and they have wisdom and they hold two of the most valuable resources on earth, time and wisdom, and that we all benefit when they're involved. So that's what led me to building Eldera. Eldera stands for bringing forth the era of the elders. We believe that we can unlock the time and wisdom of older adults as a new natural resource for all generations to thrive. So think of us as the anti-elder care. We think older adults want to care for all of us, and it's good for them and it's good for society.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Now, Lois, were you surprised when Elissa came back and was, "I'm going to study aging. I want to focus on it," or did it just happen over time and it wasn't?
It happened over time. I just thought it was brilliant. She was trying to find the spot in the body where the rubber hits the road, where stress really makes a difference. And she found, and now everybody knows it, and there are all kinds of companies and things around it, that there is a spot on a cell, the telomere, the very tip, like an eraser on a pencil, where the rubber hits the road. And it depends on, it's related to longevity, totally. If it's small and isn't regenerating itself, well, I won't get into her work, I'll say it wrong. But anyway, it was all very exciting that she was doing that.
I just have to say, I love how my mom gives me credit for that whole field. It was all me. I love it. So my colleague,
May we all have a
yeah,
mom like
it's so
Lois,
sweet.
okay?
I love this narrative, Mom. So it was a team science, of course. My colleague, Elizabeth Blackburn, discovered telomeres over 30 years ago. And so I paired up with her in my postdoc years. I came to her and knocked on her door and said, "So you have discovered one of the most important mechanisms of how cells age. Can we look at what speeds that up and what slows that down by looking at psychological resilience and stress vulnerability?"
Let's just for a moment appreciate how touching and beautiful it is to have a mom, acknowledge a daughter's
and the
work.
detail she remembers.
Yeah, and
sweet.
you brought me to the beginning of tears, and I was like, I'm on stage, but it is a beautiful thing for all of us to remember. We need to do this for our kids, at whatever age they are. I'll answer the question myself as well, because not only am now involved in the aging space, but also why involved in end of life. My father was 72 years old when I was born. So he was born in 1904 during the Yukon Gold Rush in a miner shed, because my grandmother went over the overland route in the middle of winter in the late 1890s. And so I grew up with this extraordinary 72, 73, 74, 75-year-old father who spent a lot of time with me. And so I didn't my perspective of age started when with, being very open and generous and loving of age and seeing the value in it. And then he developed Alzheimer's. And I saw what can happen to a family when you don't talk about death and how it can be destroyed. So, two edges of the same sword. But let's talk about ageism. Lois, what kind of ageism do you experience getting older? I'm just curious. We want to put it on the table and call a spade a spade.
Well, I have to say that actually, since I let my hair over COVID get absolutely white and I put some sparkles in it, I am getting more attention. And I really do think people are treating me nicer. I'm not sure I really like that because, we all want to be just like everybody else, right? and belong and not be set apart. But anyway, there it is. I'm 86. I can't believe I'm sitting here saying that. And that up to this moment, it's so good. And the thing that makes it so good is that I was so inspired by Maria Shriver. I have a spiritual base too, and I'm just always trying to be a better person. And I think that really helps. It really helps you age. At a certain point, you start to care more about the other person, and not so much about how do I look, how am I doing, but are they having a good time? What's happening? And it's a really lovely place to be. And I'm so fortunate to be able to be there. And, I really have to mention my husband, who he's a much better person than I am. And he's probably the reason for my great daughters, although he worked in the laboratory all his life, and they think he brought them up.
Dad, raise your hand so they can see you. Okay, you can hear us.
Oh, yeah. And Donna, what about the opposite kind of ageism? I mean, you were 40 under 40, young leader, also working in the aging space, which is not filled with young people. What kind of ageism do you run into?
I can't say that I would define it as ageism, or perhaps I just wasn't paying very much attention to it, which is potentially fair. I was not kidding when people think I'm in anti-aging. They're like, what do you do to your skin? I'm like, that's not what we're here to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, it's an obvious question looking at you.
I exercise every day. I meditate. I hydrate. You guys know all the things. But I think for me, it's drinking game. Everyone take a sip of water every time we talk about anti-aging things. Okay. So. Okay, but really what I want to point out is what Lois just said. So you were talking about how you see life and how you've changed the way you perceive life and what you're thankful for. And that little bit of perspective that you just heard her in 30 seconds, giving that to a young person that is struggling with understanding the meaning of life, giving that perspective, like, it's going to be okay. I'm going to be grateful about things. I want to make sure you're having fun, I don't care about how I look. That is something incredibly valuable. And I want to make sure that everyone that's out there, that's like Lois and has a little time on their hands, will share that perspective, because I know I need it, and I know everyone younger than me needs it too. So, there's a lot of conversation about ageism today, and in particular, ageism in the workspace and workplace, and some in dating too, I guess. But I think we need to change that conversation into all the benefits that age brings to you, all this incredible social capital that you gather that is so beneficial to someone else. So that's my non-response to you, Michael.
No, that's
Thank
all
you.
Right. We call that an oblique response.
I love it.
Welcome to dinner.
Yeah. But as I think you said somewhere, old is gold, or maybe you're just
old is gold. Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. This is something that I'm working on with our community at Eldera, and in partnership with Columbia University, on this concept of gold with G in parentheses, which means old is gold, unlocking the social capital of older adults. And we're looking at all the ways that we can do that using technology and to do it at scale so that every kid can benefit from it. So thank you. Old is gold.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the sense of hopelessness that younger generations feel, especially in the current climate of climate change and climate disaster and crisis. Elissa, I'm curious about two things. One, because we're talking about ageism, and Becca Levy's work has come up now twice in the last 45 minutes. So if there's anything else you want to say about internalized ageism, but also your research about generational responses to climate change, hopelessness, crisis in general.
So how many of you have experienced smoke in the last few years from the fires? And how did it impact you emotionally?
Yeah.
It felt pretty devastating that it's here, it's now, we're in it, the climate crisis. And when you can really comprehend the extent of it and how little control we have as a one person, it's devastating. And so as a psychologist who studies coping and stress, I've been very interested in existential stress and trying to understand how we are viewing this and responding. And my initial view was, we've never had anything like this. This existential stress is just, and facing the apocalypse is the first time humans have experienced this. And it's only in really talking to people who are of older generations who have also experienced what was existential stress, different, yes, and maybe not as global, but just as much of a threat to their lives. And also talking to people of color who have had existential stress, who have died at young ages, who can't feel safe in many places. So I'm no longer saying we're in an absolutely unique period of existential stress, and rather, wow, these conversations about looking back at our history and our lineages and these survival stories are so critical. So to answer your question more directly, how are the generations facing this? We have a phenomenally strong generational gradient. We have young generations feeling the overwhelming burden of climate distress. A survey of 10,000 youth from 10 different countries showed that over half of them felt humanity is doomed, felt extremely anxious about their future. It's hard to even comprehend the scale of hopelessness and despair and loss in our young generations globally. So what happens when we look at the older ages? It goes down, climate distress goes down, and climate caring is also interesting. So the younger generations have much more distress and concern and willingness to change. This Gen Z and Gen Y are they score the highest in wanting radical change as well as their distress. And then across party lines, the youth defy the party lines. The youth are distressed, Republican or Democrat. So the gap between the older generation, particularly Republicans, and the younger generation is tremendous. We're in different worlds in terms of concern. So let me just say that intergenerational conversation is so important because the youth are carrying the burden. They are hope for the movement. When we see them protesting, it's really the biggest sign that there's going to be change. But of course, they don't have the power and the financial resources. So it's got to be this intergenerational conversation. One more point. Michael asked about how we deal with crises. When we look at any data on mental health, pre-pandemic, but especially during let me talk about some pandemic data. We see the youth mental health crisis, particularly in young adults. We see the suicidality during COVID at one point. Having thought about suicide was up to 40% in a young age group. And it goes down with age. And what we never point out is over 65, it was 9%. I mean, this is a tremendous gradient. So yes, we have a very concerning crisis, but we have resilience. We have phenomenal coping and lack of depression, anxiety in our older generations. So what is that about? And how can we package that up and share it and spread that out? So I think Donna probably has something to say about that, because the stereotype is loneliness and depression, and the data certainly doesn't show the distress. It shows amazing resilience.
Exactly. I think thank you for that. I think there's not that strong of a correlation between loneliness and distress. So what we know is that 1 in 3 older adults are lonely, and 50% of people over 80 are lonely. And that's very bad. But what's much worse is that 71% of teenagers are lonely. And when they are lonely, they don't have the coping mechanisms to handle it. So they become hopeless, they become suicidal, okay? Versus the older adults don't. They feel lonely, they realize how to deal with it, they reach out to somebody, they have some sort of a coping mechanism. So what we know, we see this at Eldera every day, which makes my work incredible, incredibly rewarding. But there's research behind this from Harvard Center for Childhood Development saying that if a child can build one-on-one trusted relationships with a non-parental adult, it helps them build resilience. And this is what this youth needs. If we're putting so much hope, our hope, everyone's hope on this youth to imagine a better future for all of us, we need to give them every single resource that we can. And resilience is one of the biggest things that we can give them, and the most almost perishable and untouchable resource. And resilience is not, you can get it many different ways, some harder. Some is by talking to someone like Lois, who just put glitter in her hair and she'll tell you the way it is, and she'll stand up for her daughter. And seeing that, in a person, no, thank you. Seeing that really helps kids get a little bit different perspective, get out of that social media bubble that they're in, where they're comparing to themselves to these filtered creatures that are not even real. We know they're not real. But we need to build a very, very strong infrastructure on how we can all support this younger generation, because we do all depend on them, and that's a lot of pressure on them. That's a lot of pressure on them. A 16-year-old at Eldera told me, she said, when her parents were growing up, her parents were told, go out there and change the world. And what her generation is being told is, go out there and save the world. And that's a lot to put on them.
That's very different. So, Lois, when your daughter talks about you, and I imagine it's not just your daughter, is my sense, because now I've spent some time with you and I would use the same words. She talks about your joyfulness and your capacity for joy. So there's resilience, there's coping, and then there's joy. So I'm curious, how do you think you have maintained a sense of joy? And then you can sprinkle in some, this is how I get through resilience too.
Well, I don't know. I think really it's a gift of age, of being older. You look at a tree and it's so incredibly beautiful. The sun, the clouds in the sky, relationships. I need a lot of relationships. I belong to a lot of groups. I have 2 book groups. I love my book groups. You can have the joy of, solitariness, reading the book, all the inner activity of your mind. You're happy, you're by yourself. And then you go to a party. A book group's like a party. You go to someone's house and there's food. And it's like a party with a structure. You don't have to think, oh, I'm going to have to stand and make small talk, all night. It's a theme. It's a book, and you get to talk to these bright people. Hopefully you've found a good group. I mean, by this age, I have some really interesting people in my life, which I might say I met most of them I met in my 70s. Through different classes. We have Ollie Osher lifelong learning class. I've met people in my community I never would have met going to the grocery store or doing any of my activities. And it's so full, it's so rich. I forget where I'm going, what you asked, but I'm really having a good time.
Well, last time we talked, you mentioned gratitude as something, gratitude as something that you've really had to cultivate, and as an active part of your life, and that stuck with me.
I mentioned that, I have my feed, things that I've subscribed to, my inbox, whatever it is, email. Every day I get Buddhist stuff, I get Jewish stuff. I've subscribed to Rick Hanson. I who's a psychologist, who actually I got such a good idea out of that, and I use it and I want to share it. And his whole idea is that evolutionarily, we're programmed to remember the bad stuff because, that's going to keep you away from that tree where that bear was. And that's kind of built in. And the good stuff, someone gives you a lovely smile, you don't remember that. That goes off. And he talks a lot about cherish the good times. It's not that, let all your thoughts go. It's cherish them. Go to bed thinking about some nice interaction you had that day. And that builds in your unconscious mind, that's the layer that you start to respond more out of than fear, than remembering who slighted you or who had said something that meant, that wasn't a nice thing to say. And those are the kinds of things that, so you don't think about that. You fill your mind with great things that have happened.
Yeah, I love that. And so let's talk about joy a little bit longer. We didn't talk about it too much when we met before, but Donna, I experience you as a joyful person too. What do you think is the secret to your joyful living?
Well, first, thank you. That's one of the best compliments I can get. I mentioned a little bit my New York mom who passed away, Linda, and she used to call me a joy-seeking missile.
You were right on.
And I'm getting teary-eyed thinking about her. And a couple of years later, I was building Eldera, and I was asking our members, like, what's the number one benefit that we offer? Help me figure this out, because I think you now understand our members are involved in building the company with us. And I said, there's health outcomes, there's resilience, there's and they're like, no, it's joy. The reason why we come back to Eldera is joy. And I think joy may come from resilience, but this is a very personal story. So I grew up in communist Romania. I grew up with my grandparents. I remember what it was having 2 hours of electricity and 2 hours of water a day. I remember what it was queuing up with grandma and then separately again with grandpa to get oil and sugar, our rations. And then they would tell me stories while we were just waiting in line, queuing up. To this day, I hate queuing up. I will not go to a club for the life of me because I will not stay in a queue. But I think that once you experience life in different ways, when you're a kid, you don't know that you're missing. So you don't know that that's not how it's supposed to be. But once you start seeing life after some hardship, it looks so colorful and it's so beautiful. And you really, really get to take it in. So I think joy comes potentially from a little bit of adversity and living through a little bit of adversity, because, we all do. And trying to avoid adversity, I think it's a losing game sometimes.
Yeah. And, some of my favorite work on resilience is Bruce Feiler's work, specifically his book, The Secrets of Healthy Families. And he talks a lot about the research that was done that indicated that when somebody knows their family history, they have a much greater likelihood of living well longer. Just this one thing of knowing your family history, I was like, what's that about? Well, there's a type of family that actually shares their family history. There's going to be probably less adverse childhood experiences in that family. But there's also something psychologically that's happening, which is that you have an embodied sense of what's called an oscillating narrative, which is essentially things are good, things are bad, things get good again, things are going to get bad again, which is a type of antidote to to hopelessness, to staying in a cycle of despair, which I thought is such a great thing. It's one of the reasons why we created Generations Over Dinner. I was like, I need a really good foil for getting people to actually learn where they came from, and what their story is.
Hearing you say that makes me think about how real that is, and real for me. My grandmother was a refugee, came over on a boat, from Russia, escaping anti-Semitism, was in steerage, almost got left in Germany because she only had a child's ticket that an uncle had got her, but made it over here. And sometimes tennis is my big sport. I play 2 or 3 times a week. And I stand on that court often and I look at the trees around it and I think of my Bubby. And she could have imagined that her grandchild would be standing on a tennis court, free and a beautiful one. I'm just always moved by that. And talking about joy and gratitude, it comes together. And I'm just so grateful.
It's one of those paradoxes in life that, sometimes what I've experienced, some of the most joyful people on the planet have gone through some of the hardest things, which is a terrifying thing when we look at our kids, because we don't want them to go through terrifying things or awful things. And it's not always the case that going through hard things equals joy. But one big factor in this is stress, right? There's good stress, there's bad stress, there's how we manage it. And you've got a big book coming out, Elissa.
Yeah. I'm crying.
Yeah.
That was beautiful, Mom.
Well, we need you to set up this generational conversation.
I'm here for it.
And I haven't heard that story until more recently, and just understanding our lineage and all the resilient stories of our ancestors. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
That strength of spirit and that juxtaposition or the intertwining of suffering, adversity, and joy. So I think the ability to, one thing that happens when we're older, and I think most of us are in the aging field, and so we're very familiar with this idea that we can see the end of life, and so we reprioritize. And time, having a shortened view like that, makes us live our day to match our values of how we want to spend our precious time. And sometimes that happens through terminal illness or some terrible accident. We get that when we're young, and it's called spiritual urgency. And that for me has really shifted my life, so that the unit of in the unit of a day, it's precious. And there's all sorts of religions and philosophies that come at that with their different cultural perspectives, the preciousness. And so the book is about the day. So Michael's generously mentioning I have a book coming out in a week or so called The Stress Prescription. And it's a prescription of how to live well with stress, because we can't avoid the adversity. Things are going to get worse with the climate change and the situation we're in before they get better. And we don't know how better and how soon. And, there's the unknown. So I think number one is not leading our youth to think that we control the future, but rather we control our day and our actions, the things we can touch, and those matter. Our life matters. We affect those around us. There are ripples we will never see or feel. The positive death movement that you have been a force in has had ripples across the world that they blow my mind. And that is, that ability to see the preciousness is, I think, part of the joy we're all probably feeling together right now in this critical era of multiple pandemics and adversity and natural aging and natural daily dramas. So there's a lot of strategies in the book, and I think a lot of what we've talked about hits on them, about having perspective, being able to frame the things that fill up our mind and make us feel socially threatened, and actually step back and ask, is that going to affect my life in 5 years from now? And other people can do that for us. And I think that's part of the intergenerational conversation that you were describing about social media, and that picture might be making them feel devastated.
Absolutely.
And worthless.
Absolutely.
And just changing the perspective of our life through dinner conversations and these support. I mean, it's all about, it really comes down to relationships and connection. And even if it's just one connection, how vital that is to our well-being and happiness.
Yeah. We're going to rename this session Tears laughter, and Alice Waters tangerines.
That's right. That's I do want to mention this, that I had the incredible pleasure of participating in one of the kickoff dinners. There was not a dry eye at that dinner table. It was a longer dinner. All of us cried at some point, and it was incredible, and we left bonded because of that.
Of course.
And it's really, you mentioned connection. This is what we believe is the number one thing that we all need: connection and bond. Our kids at Eldera, the mentees, call it the bond. Yeah. And we're just barely starting to understand and scratch the surface on the benefits this bond has on both. We're very excited to learn more about that. But yeah, tears are good.
Of course. Of course they are. Well, we're pretty close to the end of our time. I'm just going to tell you a couple things about Generations Over Dinner so it's a little more clear, because people are like, well, I like that. I want some of Alice Waters tangerines. The project one, it's a nonprofit. It's funded by the Association for Growth and Education. And it's free and available to everyone. And the idea is we inspire you to look around your life and say, how age diverse is my life? Can I gather 3, 4, 5, 6, or the few people who've already done 7 generation dinners? One in Australia, one in the US that I had nothing to do with. I was like, I want to climb that Everest. And they were like, we got it. I was like, okay, great. But so the idea is we inspire people. They decide that they want to do this. We give you the scripts based upon various topics. And we have it also working in, the last panel was about the workplace. So it's also, there's a work edition of Generations Over Dinner, because we saw very clearly, thanks to Chip Conley's work, my co-founder, and his book, Wisdom at Work, and the deep amount of work he's done in the workplace, that there's a real opportunity for diversity and need for age diversity in the workplace. Let's enact this. Here's a program, and it's not a big, expensive program. It's a free program. And we've now have it being piloted at LinkedIn. They're doing 7 campuses, I believe, on one day in January. Chevron's doing 5 campuses, including Australia and Nigeria and California in June. Humana is piloting it. And there's a list of folks. So that's starting to happen as well. And then if we can show the slide, this is my ask to you. I came to dinner or lunch with an ask. So on, do we not have the slide? We don't have, there's no media. It's all great. Oh yeah, the slide would be great if we can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Now.
Oh, that's let's watch the film. Let's watch the film.
Oh,
How can we bring together multiple generations at a dinner table to talk about important topics?
I definitely was unsure about how the dinner was going to go over. There's a divide a little bit between generations.
I was born in 48, so I am a baby boomer.
I'm Generation X.
I was born in 39.
A lot of people see the boomers as, okay, boomer, don't tell me your war stories.
We elder millennials have a little bit of judgment towards our younger members of our cohort.
A lot of adults do complain that we're too negative about things.
It seems like we're on our phones a lot, and we are, but we do care about social justice issues, and we're more passionate about these things than I think people see.
We're looking to them to fix what's wrong.
I love what my generation has done.
From the youngest member to the oldest member, there's so much to learn from each other.
Anything that connects people to folks who are not in their ordinary daily lives is powerful. You could really talk about things that are important.
The challenges and divisions in our world leave me feeling very helpless and paralyzed. I didn't imagine that having simple conversations could feel like an important way of responding.
Everybody listens to everybody else patiently, but everybody got a turn to speak.
It really was impactful to hear how everyone's different experiences contributed to their worldview.
We were able to find a common language and cut across those boundaries in a very authentic way.
We could use more generations at the dinner table.